Hello and welcome back, and yep, we got it. This is the Comet X, arguably the most interesting KVM that Gl.iNet has ever released. At this point, I think they've got like 5 or 6 different models of KVM, and I've tested them all. But what sets this one apart, if you'd seen our earlier news video about this a few weeks ago, is that this device controls 4 devices. It's not a one-to-one KVM, allowing you to access it on a local area network, access it via remotely over the internet, utilizing the good cloud service, Tailscale, zero tier, and hopefully more, but as well as allowing you to access it locally in a standalone mode. More on that later on. This isn't currently available. This isn't really a review. I was actually going to make a full review in about 2 months' time, and I will make a follow-up video on this device. But the reason I want to talk about it now is the Comet X, although it's been announced by the brand but not available for purchasing, it has been added as an additional purchase alongside this. This is another KVM we talked about on the channel a while ago when we went over to Shenzhen, China, and they were showing off at their headquarters new devices, and this is the Comet Q, a USB-C powered 1 cable KVM LCD panel. We made a video about it. We tested it with Android. We tested it with a MacBook. We have a follow-up video on this coming very, very soon, and it's currently $89 on crowdfunding. Keyword there, crowdfunding, not traditional retail, so know the risks. However, they've delivered on crowdfunding previously, and they still have a huge range of KVM devices at traditional retail on their site, on Amazon, etc. But the reason I bring this up, this quirky little turkey device, is because if you go to the crowdfunding pages, you find that this has now become an extra you can add to your order of this. I couldn't see a way that you can buy this on its own right now, and it has a promo price of $202. And when you look at the price of individual KVMs from this brand, the idea you've got one device that can control 4 devices and arrives with a PoE input and USB-C input, and arrives with quad-core ARM and 1 gig of DDR memory and 64 gig of storage, and a front-mounted touchscreen display that allows you to control the device as well as enter a passkey, as well as have real-time visual output of the thing you're connected to, and has local access with a local HDMI output that you can connect to a screen, more on that later, and dedicated USBs there on the front for a keyboard and a mouse for a standalone unit on top of your server cabinet controlling the servers. For $202, this is insane, and that is why I'm making this video today. This isn't a review. This isn't an evaluation of a prototype in progress. The hardware is done. I'll say that right now. The hardware, to me, feels done. Now it comes down to firmware updates. It comes down to the optimization of the software. And TLDR, the software isn't finished yet. You'll have to watch the whole video for the finer details, but long story short, they are clearly porting over the Gl.iNet KVM software they've been using in their one-to-one KVM devices and are now building on top of that to make this multi-KVM, and that doesn't feel finished yet, and you'll see that later on. I'm not counting it against it. It's still got time in software development, and it's not available at retail yet, so we're not going to hit them with a stick over this. But the significance of this device for me simply comes down to the affordability of KVM to the market right now, but also a wider degree of support for larger server and home labbing there. Even when you purchase the device, in the retail kit, the retail kit is there, there's manuals, there's instructions, there's also almost every sodding cable you're ever going to need, and normally I would slate a company for that, for e-waste. But just frankly, you're deploying this in a server cabinet where you might want uniformity. You might want cables of the same length. And for that, I'll agree, having USB Type-A to Type-C cables and HDMI cables all of the same length will be desirable. So again, normally I'd hit a brand with a stick over this, but I kind of get it. Although I will say, 1, there isn't any USB Type-C to Type-C cables, and when you do get the cables, there isn't additional cables for that local KVM deployment there. Small, minor complaint, but it's just when I was setting this up and connecting it to this mobile gaming rig or connecting it to my MacBook, these were devices that only had USB Type-C, and I had to use adapters and converters to get the job done. Just something to bear in mind there. But the reason I'm banging on about accessories is this also arrives with a mini rack kit. You can also utilize these to deploy in a few different ways, but this is clearly a KVM for home labbing. And also, let's face it, if you're going to have 4 clients that close together, this isn't really going to be a consumer-led device in the traditional sense. Now, the front-mounted LCD panel there gives you everything that we've seen so far on the Comet 5G, on any of the Comet devices really. It's touchscreen, you can scroll through, you can adjust the brightness, adjust the lock screen, set up the remote access. As mentioned, see local input of what's going on with the KVM you're connected to, but a physical button here. This physical button allows you to flick between the individual inputs on the local screen, but it also controls the overarching abilities of this device as well. So even when you're accessing it over the network, this button rules everything. Keep that in mind. Now, on the rear there, you can see all of those lovely connections there. There is a USB Type-C port there for the KVM control, 1 cable, keyboard and mouse, an HDMI output at 4K, allowing you to input into the device, but crucially not output, which will bug some users, and a USB 2 port there at the top that is utilized for things like the ATX power board or that fingerbot to press powers of varying degrees there. Again, the PoE input, well, I'm going to save power monitoring on this and what numbers I've got until closer to its release in the follow-up video, because I've always found that whenever I've measured the power utilization of a prototype, firmware optimization and stuff like that, it just throws those numbers to the wall. But you do have a 5-volt USB alongside it as well, so you've got that flexibility of the deployment. And if you've watched any of my videos previously, you'll know that when it comes to their software and the KVM control, it's incredibly user-friendly. Everything from adapting the visual interface and the display, prioritizing latency or quality, depending on your own setup there, the copy and paste mechanic there that I will argue, and you'll see that later on, could still do a little bit more work there. The storage, 64 gig of storage is inside this via eMMC that you can use to either store files and then remote mount them on the KVM, which is really cool for Mac and Windows as well. So it just brute forces the storage into there as its own separate storage pool, storage drive. On top of that, you can also use it to store the ISOs, which you can then use to control and access BIOS. You'll see this a little bit more in the video, but I will say that is one of the areas that I think optimization on this still needs to be done before it hits release. But overall, this alongside a metal chassis and the fact that I had the system up and running for almost 2 days straight, and just generally, it's quiet. I don't know if there's a fan inside. Maybe someone can correct me, but I didn't hear any fans. I'm kind of reluctant to take it apart, if I'm honest. I'm going to be coming back to this and reviewing it again after the firmware updates in 2 months. But I'm kind of wondering if there is any fan in this at all, because I didn't hear a damn thing. And in terms of thermals, I was actually pretty impressed. After a day or so, call it 28, 29 hours, something like that, when I had the device up and running connected with 4 different client devices, the temperatures sat at around 45 to 51 degrees at different areas of the device, with the rear ports being the hottest and the metal chassis doing a little bit of a job of that dissipation there overall. So I was really happy with the temps it was reading. And that is in arguably a closed room environment here on quite a warm day here in the UK. But inside a server cabinet, it'll be interesting to see how good that temperature can be maintained. So overall, I'm really happy with what I'm seeing, and if it does have a fan inside, I think most users won't care because it's presumably attached to a bunch of servers and we're going to make more noise than this possibly could anyway. As I say, this isn't a review. It is just because Gl.iNet added this device as an optional extra on this crowdfunding project, and therefore I felt compelled to at least give you a status update on where it's at right now. But let's set the device up with a big pile of client devices and just see what exactly this thing can do. Okay, so here is my rather jerry-rigged setup here for today's test. Now, again, you may hear the fan noise from multiple devices. What we've got here is a MacBook Pro M4. We have got a 1X player gaming handheld here. We have got my Windows 11 laptop. And finally down here, we have an Acer Store 2-bay NAS, a Nimbus Store 2 Gen 2. And right there in the middle of the screen, there is our Gl.iNet KVM Comet X. Now, again, close to the fan, sorry about the noise. Probably the first thing you want to know about really with this device, if we flick over to the screen, is going to be how responsive things are. Now bear in mind I'm using OBS to record this, but still nonetheless you can change a lot of the visual fidelity just like the software before, and I will go through the software even though I've covered it before, because that does actually lead me quite neatly in a bit to one of the early issues I've discovered with this, which Gl.iNet tell me they are in the process of resolving. So again, you can change the resolution very, very easily, and there at the top right, our brand new option, flicking through our devices. I've named them by default, they won't be given names, it'll just be HDMI 1, 2, 3, etc. So for example, if we flick to that MacBook there, we can just see how responsive it is. Now in my original testing, it takes about 8 seconds. Gl.iNet say they are looking into optimizing that. So if we snap that on the side of the screen, and we'll come back to what's on the screen there right now. But from the Mac, let's go ahead and flick into the gaming handheld there. So if we go ahead, click gaming handheld and then start it off. So again, about 8 seconds it should take. It has shaved or added maybe 1 to 2 seconds, depending on the OS of choice. And as you can see, you have to wait until it goes fully colored. It took about 8 seconds, 8.5. Now, again, depending on the device I was testing, when I tested different operating systems and servers, what I found was that time, the lowest I ever got it to was about 6 seconds for the change. But part of that, no doubt, was to do with the handling. For example, when I'm talking about that MacBook down there, Mac and having an external display, mirrored display, is nowhere near the same as flicking between, say, Windows and their secondary HDMI output, or heaven forbid, different servers and the CPU, just how many, how graphically, what the graphical fidelity is of the HDMI, and whether it's using just system basic graphics or it's got integrated graphics and stuff like that. So there has to be factored into that transition there between them. So if we go back into that software there, again, you can physically change the input if you choose to, or the button physically on the device. So using the physical button will change the default outlook of what's being accessed on here. So do keep that in mind. Not a huge problem, but again, I'm using version 1.8.1 release 2. But again, the brand is telling me that they are working on significant updates specific to this device. Now, the reason I bring that up is because throughout my testing, if I was using one system, like I was, par example, here, when I've got multiple different KVM devices that I connect to, they've generally been very, very responsive. So if I go ahead and connect into this other device here, so this isn't one on my local area network, this is a device I'm accessing remotely. If I go ahead and log into that device, and I'll go ahead and I'm going to restart this device. It may take a little while because there's some other stuff running in here. This is a test machine you can probably have made out there from the whole Windows certification thing on the bottom left. But we'll let this KVM reboot there in the background. Now, why am I doing this? Because what I want to show you is right now when I was utilizing the Comet X, when I tried to get into the BIOS of some of the other devices that I've got locally near me, it wasn't as responsive as when I was using others. So as you can see right there, I've gone into the splash screen, and let's see if I can get into the BIOS there. This should allow me to get into the BIOS of that device if I've not been too slow. But still, nonetheless, it has allowed me to see that splash screen there. So while it knocks around with that in the background, I think I've missed the BIOS splash screen if I'm honest. Let's try that same thing again here. So if I go ahead onto the portable gaming handheld I've got there, and I go ahead and I'm going to restart that device. In my earlier testing, so right now, as you can see, it is restarting that there in the background. I'm going to hold that up to the screen so you can see just exactly what is happening there on both of these devices. We've lost the signal, as you can see there on that left screen, on the KVM screen, but the handheld gaming tablet has already gone into that splash screen there. And again, I've reached out to KVM on this. I have raised it with them, and they have said this is being optimized. It's just the software version they're running right now. As you can see now, it's established that connection there between the two. It's not as responsive right now as a singular KVM. And I think that's really, really important. Because let's face it, this is a much more server deployable KVM management device. And these are devices where I would argue getting into BIOS is way more important than any other device I've talked about there. So again, something to work on, GLI, and they say they are, but I just wanted to touch on that because as good as the software is, the software is still, to me, in the process of being merged into a more unique software experience and UX for this device. That said, I still love this software, and the fact that I can flick between different devices, so if I flick into that Acer Store NAS, again, it'll take 7 to 8 seconds there. I love that. The idea that I can manage most of these devices, and as long as they can reduce that latency before this hits full retail, because this is still a prototype I've been sent, that's only a good thing. Some of you may be wondering right now with the mouse alignment there, a big part of that is because I'm trying to make sure I can give you the highest fidelity I can while simultaneously running that, of course, in OBS. But the result is that I'm not playing around with a lot of the visual settings that will change and be more reactive in the screen quality there. So, for example, adaptive or going through to the original pixel density there. All of these devices I'm utilizing right now, from the MacBook right the way through to the NAS, have got very different resolutions. You can change, you can adapt all of those. You can change the responsiveness there, as mentioned at the top left with the mode that you select, as well as the transfer of that visual information packets here on the local area network. And again, you can connect this remotely. But still, nonetheless, that's another area I think they're going to have to tighten it there, because the software at the moment, where it is designed originally around 1 KVM management, I didn't see this level of difficulty when flicking, for example, from the NAS onto, say, the MacBook, that the mouse placement there doesn't feel the same across both of those devices. It definitely is obviously going to be dependent on the device you're connecting to, but as you can see, I'm still a little bit ahead, and how much it's catching up, I will have to go through some of those settings in this case. But at the very least, they do provide a whole bevy of different customizations and meeting of parity between the client and the host device there. The rest of the controls haven't really changed between this and other Gl.iNet KVM devices. If you're new to a Gl.iNet KVM device, you've got that audio input-output. Do bear in mind with that if you want to get the sound going back, notwithstanding that you have to reboot, just like it showed you there on screen. But you're going to get that feedback in this environment, so I'm not really going to show that off. Then you've got things like the keyboard control there, whether you want to enable it, whether you want to have the virtual keyboard to have the entrance of information there, and also bad link mode, where when you are copying and pasting in, if you do want it to be far more singular in terms of the copy and paste rather than just one line of instruction, which can lead to oversaturation of information, you can enable that. So, for example, I've enabled bad link mode there. If we go into the toolbox to copy and paste some information. So let's go into a different system here. Let's go into that handheld device there. We'll let that open up. As you can see, depending on the device you're going for there, you can actually hear when it is kicking in. And what I've prepared here in the background is a large amount of information. This is 0 to 3,550. I can go ahead and copy that. And let's open up just a bog standard Notepad doc. So let's open that up. And then from there, I'm just going to go ahead and enter that information into the top left and then paste it into the remote device there. And as you can see, there's already a few gaps. It's not, terrible, but there is definitely gaps. You can see the odd one there with the 3. You can see right there at the beginning. The information is being carried over, but I would argue not quite as smoothly. Now, let's do exactly the same thing again in a moment when we move over to the non-bad link variation. But I will say this does highlight another problem, which is if I go into, let's go into the Windows 11 machine. So in the Windows 11 machine, that copy and paste instruction that I've delivered to one client, I am now going to be looking over to do it into this one. But if I go into this here, as you can see at the bottom left of the screen, it is continuing that copy-paste maneuver. Now, if you're managing different KVMs and you're, delivering instruction, that may be problematic. This is another thing I have raised with Gl.iNet, and they are saying this is being ironed out in an update as we speak. But it is just something to bear in mind. This is what I mean about the software that's clearly been honed and developed around a single KVM host client. Extending that out into multiple devices, I do still think needs a little bit more work. Whereas if you disable that bad link mode, go back into the toolbox, we paste our information again, and again we go in, we switch over once again to the handheld device. And we'll repeat exactly the same test without that bad button push mode avoidance in place. So we just wait the 7 or 8 seconds. We go ahead, we delete all of that, and we repeat the same process. We pop that in. And even then, we're still seeing that odd error. But now, if anything, I would argue the error is even worse. And again, if I come out of this, go into the Windows 11 machine, again, 7 to 8 seconds for that transition there. Again, we are accessing over the local area network, and we do have different hardware in place. Open it up there. As you can see, it's still carrying that over. So again, hopefully we'll see a resolution to this in a future update before this device hits full retail. Or at the very least, they could update there on the toolbox the ability to kill off an existing command. Because I know obviously this has been handed over because they're not dribbing and drabbing this information there. Still, I'm pretty sure Gl.iNet are going to resolve this, and I know this software right now is still living somewhere between the single and the multi-client. So again, hopefully we'll see an update to this, and if you do go to their official pages, you will see those regular updates appear. Next up, let's see what that latency is. Yes, I'm on the local area network, but I think we should look into it. There is our tablet device, and I'm going to go ahead and kickstart it, and hopefully you can see both on screen. 3, 2, 1, go. So again, I'm just going to completely max screen it there, so you can see the whole thing. And let's have a look how that is doing there. So hopefully you can see it better than me. But at the very least, from what I'm seeing here, it is largely identical, which is really good to see. Next up, I want to talk about a fun little deployment scenario, and arguably one of the ways in which I'm going to be utilizing this device. And that is when you have separate networks comprised of devices that might not have internet access, but do have visual access. Now, what do I mean by that? For example, this is an old Acer store that I've had here in the studio to do tests. I've actually upgraded onto a different Acer store device to do ADM and Acer store NAS testing, but this one I still keep running, but it has no internet access. It's only got local area network access, and that's really, really important for me. But I may need to troubleshoot. So when that happens, accessing this may become problematic, and using a KVM like this and a NAS device that has an HDMI output that either allows me to go with command line or an HDMI user interface is going to be useful. And as you can see, this is exactly the same Acer store NAS. There's the IP there at the top, but this one on the right is being accessed there via that KVM device. And again, not that I'm going to use a lot of these features, but it could be very good for troubleshooting. And once it comes down to that stuff, when you're accessing it via BIOS, it'll be very desirable. But still, I just wanted to touch on that because I do think there is demand and use deployment scenarios that some may not have thought of. Next up, what about video fidelity? Right now, I've got a video that I published recently, the eNAS series video, and I've got it running here on this MacBook. So again, just like the number before, let's have a little look and just see how well these two are catching up together. And again, I think, I think maybe what? A fraction of a second difference there. I know you guys can probably see it better there on screen, but at the very least we do have that level of difference between them. As you can see, it's still trying to access a remote server. Ignore that 196 IP there in the middle. That's my MacBook trying to access a mapped drive I connected earlier on. But still, nonetheless, it is still at the very least a good bit of visual fidelity there between the two of them. Obviously, remote access is going to be slightly different there between them. But let's go ahead and close that window there on the Mac. I do quite like it with these KVMs, just how easy it is to flick between different operating systems, which, let's face it, is going to be a godsend. I just really hope that they're going to improve the specific version of this software tailored towards this device. Because in a single KVM environment scenario, I've recommended Gl.iNet constantly, and I know this isn't at release point now. I just really want to see that same level of responsiveness on their software on this multi-client deployment. I know I'm being a broken record, but it's really important to me. I do love this product. I really, really do, and it needs to exist in the format it is. But again, Gl.iNet, just tweak those little things for me. Now back to the controls, it is worth highlighting. Let's flick over to a different device. Let's go to the MacBook. It is worth highlighting with the controls there on the left-hand side, you actually have a decent amount of flexibility on just what keyboards and mice inputs are actually doing there. So there we've got onto the MacBook system there. Not only have you got the option there to enable or disable the keyboard stuff with the virtual keyboard already touched on, but you've also got the ability to swap between Mac and Windows input environments. Alongside that, whether you want to allow the mouse to be used at all, as well as enabling things like mouse jiggle to stop it going into screensaver, all good. But you can also enforce some of the controls of the mouse input. So for example, your scroll up, scroll down may be different, inverted, etc. And that's all pretty much adaptable there between the client and the host device there. And much down to that customization I mentioned earlier before about system identification and then kind of hybrid migrating between the two of them is all rather adaptable there. Next up, we're going to the toolbox we've already touched on with the copy and pasting, where you can create your own inputs there that are unique to your own personal setup there. Again, useful for BIOS, as well as the enabling of things like Wake on LAN if your devices support it, and terminal level access if it can be granted to add command line forced into the system. Again, that command line is within the Gl.iNet Comet X system there. Accessories, we've touched on it in other videos. You can take advantage of things like an ATX power card or a USB power device that with the robot finger there that allows you to do power on and change the density of that input. Then you have things like the virtual media arriving with that 64 gig of storage, some of it being utilized by the device. And again, you can choose several different things. You can go ahead, for example, to mount ISOs if you choose onto this for BIOS and stuff like that, or you can directly transfer. So for example, as you see, I've now created a storage transfer area. And what I'd be interested in seeing is how that works between the multiple clients, because I do like this software in previous iterations of single system. So as you can see, the virtual mount is on the current port. The mount will disconnect after switching ports. So as we flick between them, you are going to have to remount that. That data will still live on the Comet X device, but mounting it into this will not just immediately carry it over without any change. So for example, if we go into that Windows system, let's go into the Windows 11. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to cut out these little 7 or 8 minute segments. I think you guys would prefer if I keep it in just to keep things squeaky clean and on the level. We're into this new system here, so let's go ahead in the virtual media and let's drag a bunch of files in. So let's click that. Let's go into my video section. I'm just going to grab a big old chunky pile of files. Now, it won't allow me to multi-select files, which is kind of annoying, I'll be honest. But let's go ahead and pick the biggest file that's there. So let's select that by details, drop it down by size. So the biggest file there, I've got one that's around about 0.5 GB. So let's see what that number is. So we're seeing about 12 to 13 megabytes. Now, with smaller file types, I have seen numbers go as high as 25 megabytes per second there. But again, not the quickest. But at the very least, it's not single digits. And that is a chunky sequential file there. So we'll let that finish up while it transfers its data. Then what we'll do is we'll see if this file will appear easily on the target system via that hosted drive and how streamable it is, I guess. But then also flick over to, say, the Mac system and see how the Mac endeavors with the shared file that it's going to be on it there. So the file's been uploaded. So let's go ahead and mount that file. Let's go ahead and file share onto that device. We've seen that drive appear on the bottom right of the screen. So if we go into the PC Manager, it opened up before I even had a chance to do it. And there is our video file there. Full disclosure, I have no idea what this file is, so it's going to be interesting to see what it does. But it's a 0.5 GB file. Let's see if the issue is VLC, whether we can force it. So this file's a video that I had with 45 drives when they asked for feedback on a device they sent me after the review. So again, it is streamable. It's all working there and lovely and neatly there within the window. But let's go ahead and change ourselves into a new system. Let's flick into that MacBook. As mentioned on there, it's clearly dismounting it. We can remount it there afterwards. Let's get that going in there. We've heard the bing bong of the system that it's connecting to disconnecting. Making our way into the Mac system. And then from there, let's go ahead and remote mount our media once again for file sharing. I'm getting ahead of myself with the clicks. And that will mount it there onto our target system. It's going to be interesting to see how the Mac interprets this. But let's go into the disk utility. See if it's actually appeared for a start. There's the Gl.iNet Universal drive there. Let's go into Finder. Let's get a brand new Finder window there. Have a little look. And we find ourselves the Universal drive. It's not that one. And there is Gl.iNet, and there is our video file. So we can go ahead and open that up within MKV. VLC, I should say. MKV, what the hell is that? So it's doing the job, I will say that. But again, with the video file there and everything going on in between, still more than well enough to do the job. And at the very least, I'm actually kind of pleased that the carryover of that data isn't universal. I'm pleased to say that it did dismount the storage before I moved on to another device, and inadvertently, if it was like an ISO or something that was being mounted, that could have been problematic there. So again, I like that. Another fun point I touched on when I first heard about this device that I showed my concerns about was to do with the RAM on this device. And a few of you, it turns out rightly so, said 1 gig of RAM should be absolutely fine. And I'll say right now, as we have got usage monitor there on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see of the 1 gig, so that's the 987 being utilized there. I'm going to flick between each of these individual devices because I'm only speaking as one client user accessing this. It is worth remembering that, and something I should have remembered for that matter, is we are only accessing one device at a time. So it's not like it's partitioning that RAM in 4 different directions constantly. It is diverting those assets. And although you can see the dip when I'm flicking between the different VMs, the different remotely accessed devices as KVMs, definitely that amount of RAM is more than sufficient. It's leaving almost, over half of the available RAM during the course of these changes that I'm making right here is still available for some of those file transmissions. That said, if we were accessing this via the likes of Tailscale or Zero Tier, chances are that utilization would be a pinch higher if we're using some of the other security measures perhaps, or maybe if we were ramping up some of the quality of what we're accessing here. So we'll go for a lossless quality there. And again, as we go through, we'll just set this up best picture quality we can, just ramping everything up to the max. That RAM still does seem more than sufficient. So again, most of my concerns, by the looks of things, if not all of them, were unfounded. Fantastic. I will also add the number of layers of security you can add for access is pretty darn good, notwithstanding the PIN code entry system that you can add on the KVM itself to lock the device for only away from anyone that doesn't have access. But you can also, alongside the account that you've created using the Good Cloud service or the third-party one, adding 2-factor identification or OTP to that account. But alongside that, you can go ahead when accessing the system to add a further layer of security by adding a password that you have to enter to get into the user interface of each individual accessible KVM client. And then on top of that, you can go ahead to choose, if you wish, to use Tailscale instead of their own Good Cloud service, or Zero Tier for peer-to-peer access. Or finally, you can go ahead and enable 2-factor authentication at this level as well. So there's a decent arrangement of security precautions, at least in this firmware version that I've got pre-release. And I'd be interested to see if they can add any more along the way. That said, I really do hope they change this whole sharing thing. So for example, what you can use currently in beta is the ability to allow users to have temporary access to a VM. They still have to create a Gl.iNet account in order to do so, so you are locked in on their own service. But I think there needs to be more layers of control and authentication, or at least sysadmin control for sharing remote access. This will be good on the client side, I would argue, when they need to give IT support remote access, but still, I'm not sure. I think this needs a little bit more layers of security control in front of it. But overall, I really like the layers that they've added into this software, but on the client side and just generally on the software platform. So next up, I want to talk about the local input on the Comet X. So another one of the things this device brings that's new to the Gl.iNet KVM range is that alongside being able to control multiple different devices, and I've got the same devices connected, this also has a couple of USB 2 type A ports for a keyboard and a mouse, and also an HDMI dedicated just to a standalone input. The result is that right now, this is not connected to a separate PC. this is connected directly onto this KVM device. And this right now is connected to this here at the bottom. This is connected to this mobile PC. So let's go ahead and just select an option there. And as you can see, it's going there through the screen. And of course, controls work the other way around. I can go ahead and just play around and access and fully control this device. Again, that's interesting, but what's really interesting is when we flick between different devices. Say you had multiple servers, and then those multiple servers on the top of the tower has a monitor and your keyboard and your mouse. Not unusual, but particularly when it's managed in this fashion and at this price point, I would say that is unusual. So from here, we need to physically touch the button, and I'll enter my key. And now I'm going to switch to port number 4. I'm trying to remember if that's the NAS or the Mac. Again, I've got the NAS still running there in the background. I've got this Windows PC playing a media file. I've got this gaming tablet here. And finally, I've got the Mac running. So this appears that I've logged into the Acer Store NAS device. Nearly forgot the name there for a second. And again, I've got the access just like I had before. So we'll log in. And there you go, we're now logged into that NAS device via its own interface. So now let's flick onto another device. So now let's flick onto port number 3. Port 3, for all I know, port 3 is that one. I've genuinely forgotten at this point. It's the same transition time. I will say that. The time it's taking to flick between them, no, this is now centered in with this one. Again, it's going to be how you label them out. I'll be honest, I've made this on the fly. But nonetheless, the local input of that KVM does bring an extra layer of control, access and convenience for a KVM device like this, not just the remote access. So yum, yum, love it. The mobile application, I will say, just like some of the things I've alluded to already, still feels like they've not finished porting over a lot of the flexibility and abilities from a single KVM device into a multi-KVM device. Let me explain. If I log in to this KVM right now, the one we're utilizing, we'll go ahead and log into it. The first thing you'll see is it's going to log me out of the desktop appliance there. This one account can't be used simultaneously across them. Now, I kind of get that from a security stance. That's okay. So again, that's why you can't see it on the desktop. And again, you can rotate this, by the way, to make it full screen. But if I do that with a screen recording, it won't play ball that much. But if we go into the user interface and settings, at least at the time of recording, what we've got is a lot of the usability in video modes, the ability to change the picture quality from smart to normal and adapt in the resolution, the ability to add the wake on LAN, the ability to add access control. But do you know what's missing? The ability to flick between the different interfaces. That's right. Even if you go into that relativity mode, you'd think maybe there's some hidden option I can't see. None of them are there. And again, you can find out real-time information. You can add that keyboard for some of the local access controls. But again, I don't have the ability right now, even when accessing this Mac here, to flick between the screens. Now, if I press the physical button on the KVM device, that allows me to change the screen. So I'll just do that there in the background and flick to port 2. That is now on the physical device switching to signal port 2. Now, when I'm tapping it, I've lost my HDMI signal because we're now moving over to the second device there. And as you can see, now I flicked over to the other one. So the facility for the web browser application to support changing between the different KVM devices is there. But the physical control is not built into the mobile app at the time of recording. I've no doubt that they are going to change that. This isn't one of the things I've raised with them. But still, this is clearly something they are going to add because this device clearly, once again, needs a more tailored software environment ported over to it than what currently exists on the other Comet devices. I am not going to tell you this device is finished. It's not. They don't say it is. I'm not saying it is. But it's bloody close. Let's be honest. I kind of get financially why they have tapped this device alongside this device on crowdfunding. This thing so far, remember, is $89 a pop. Currently, that crowdfunding has raised over $750,000 right now. So having this as an optional extra, and when you tack them together and you're looking at under $300 for the pair, that is a compelling argument to be made. And because it's crowdfunding, there is an argument, I'm not going to make it, but some would, that you are generally purchasing a product, if not in development, then a product that isn't quite ready for retail yet. So I get the logic why these two devices have now been added together in the same crowdfunding project. I will link to them below, and it is an affiliated link, by the way, so we do get a commission here at NAS Compares, myself and Eddie, to get the job done, and it is on this device, so anything you buy, we get a small commission from that. It's up to you, use it, ignore it, you do you. But I will say right now that this is a device I wanted to exist, and currently it's living up to most of those expectations. Things I love, the multi-KVM input, the PoE support, the local access as a standalone model there, the touchscreen there, the silent nature of the device, just generally everything about the control manner I like. Things I don't like, I think you can tell, it's going to be the software. Right now, the software still feels like exactly the same software that these devices used, and it needs to be treated differently for switching between different KVMs and that profile management there when you're going between them. There's just a little bit more work to be done there, but I think they'll do it. Let me know what you guys think. And again, link below, support what we do if you are going to get hold of this. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.